4,500 American deaths. How many Iraqis died? Does anybody know? Shout out the number. Isn't it funny that countries go to war and they'll name their own dead, but they don't care how many others died? Babies, old people. I mean, we don't aim to do that, but it's war. It happens. Thousands, hundreds of thousands died. And our insecurity is fed by a lot of the trouble that goes on in the world. And one of the things that we can't understand, especially about terrorism, is how human life can be so cheap. And the terrorists in this world can turn on us and hate us and send people in to kill us. How can they hate so much? This is a theological question. It's not a sociological question or a political question. It's a theological question. What is going on in the mind of some people that they can be so evil and so hateful? And if you want security and answers, you get no security because there are no answers to that. We've seen it over and over again, generation after generation. I was reminded of a lot of this, and I got thinking on this path. Last night, Susan and I were invited by Milton and Dorothy Whiting to the military ball at the Armory. It was a fundraising event for the Veterans Center there. It was a wonderful evening, and other than the fact that the dance floor was a little bit too slippery, and clearly Susan and I were the two best dancers in the whole place. I didn't want to bring that up, but we could have been a lot better if the floor wasn't so slippery. But at any rate, it was a wonderful event. And of the many awards, the Whitings got an award because they've done so much wonderful work over there. But another award was given to a man who works with homeless veterans. And not too long ago, a study was done, and 1/4 of all the homeless people in America are honorably discharged veterans. 1/4 of all the homeless in America are honorably discharged veterans. No security, right? They have no security at all. We try to give them security in places like the Veterans Center, but the world that we live in is so insecure, and yet we think by struggling in some way, we could bring about security. So then the gospel story comes along, and Jesus talks about chaos and destruction, betrayal and persecution. Jesus uses the word times. These times will come. And what's the answer to these times? Only hope from God. See, that boy in the hospital is like a little illustration of the chaos and the suffering and the unthinkable things that happen to us and to those we love. The things that are shocking to a teacher. I'm always amazed because I go to hospitals, obviously more than most of you do, hopefully, and you go into the hospital and you see people just completely overwhelmed by what is happening to their loved one. Because even though we're in a hospital, we are surprised by the suffering that we are able to see. It was like the Jews in the story, you know. They said, well, what about this beautiful temple? And Jesus says it's all going to go away. And Luke's gospel was actually written after the Romans had destroyed the temple. So what is being said to us is actually a fast forward of some of history. Luke is remembering then what Jesus said about the temple and the times, the bad times. The Jewish people, the religious people of his age, thought life could not possibly go on without the temple. It's not possible that God would continue life or let everything go on without the temple. God would end the world and the temple would be destroyed. I don't know how you get close to that feeling unless you imagine how the little boy in the hospital with the burns, how his parents would have felt if he had died from those burns. Some of you have had the experience of the death of children. And I know the question came up, how would life go on without that person? Jesus confronts all of this, in fact, builds on it, and then says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. We wonder how he could even say that in the midst of this. Or how anybody could say it in the midst of anything. Do not be afraid. The do not be afraid doesn't come automatically. For instance, when we spend the $10,714 in huge groups of people all over the entire United States, and we say, okay, now we're going to go to war, and then we say, well, because we're spending all this money, we don't need to be afraid. Yeah, we do need to be afraid, don't we? It didn't buy us any security. We think it made the world better in some respects, but that hasn't been, the jury's still out on that one too. But Jesus says by enduring in faith, we have full life because we have a relationship with God. And our relationship with God is not something that can be bought or something that can be lost. Do not be afraid. He would add to this, security in the world isn't possible anyway. So don't even go down that path. Do not be afraid. Losing the temple is not the end. The attacks on America are not the end. All of the financial crisis that we've gotten into is not the end. Iraq and Afghanistan don't bring the end. Do not be afraid. Faith says there is no end to life from God, with God, or in God. To me, the teacher in the story I told you about, the little boy, the teacher represents God. The teacher comes presenting something brand new to this kid. Something new to learn. The teacher calms his fears, although she doesn't even know she's doing it. But certainly, like God, she calms his fears.